What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for NFL Week 7 Sleeper Picks.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to give you some of my top DFS Sleeper Picks.
Super low priced and low ownership players that could crush value this week and give your lineup an advantage over the field. These are risky plays, meant for large tournaments only. Don't go all in on any of these guys. They are high risk, high reward picks. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made.
Okay guys, NFL Week 7. Let's take a look at the quarterback position. My sleeper pick at the quarterback position is Ben Roethlisberger from the Pittsburgh Steelers playing the Tennessee Titans, who have the 7th worst defense overall, and they give up the 7th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Ben Roethlisberger has averaged 19.2 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 3.2 rush attempts per game. He scored 11, 21, and 19 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So last week was an off week for Ben Roethlisberger, but remember, he didn't have Deontay Johnson, one of his favorite wide receiving targets, but he's got him back now this week, and Ben Roethlisberger is only going to be about 2% owned, projected at 18.8 fantasy points here in Week 7. He's $6,600 DraftKings salary and $800 more on FanDuel. So the Tennessee Titans are going to give Ben Roethlisberger a run for his money. He's going to have to put up a lot of points to win this game. He's got a great matchup here. All of his offensive weapons are healthy. So I like Ben Roethlisberger here versus the Tennessee Titans. Okay, so if you're playing on DraftKings, you can play this sleeper pick. I like Tom Brady from the Tampa Bay Bucks playing the Las Vegas Raiders, who have the 8th worst defense overall, and they give up the 9th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Tom Brady has averaged 20.4 fantasy points per game on the season. He's getting an average of 2.5 rush attempts per game, and he scored 15, 14, and 37 fantasy points in his last 3 games. He's only going to be about 2% owned here, projected at 19.7 fantasy points here in Week 7. He's $6,600 DraftKings salary and $800 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 52 points scored in this game, with the Bucks favored by 4.5. Great matchup here for Tom Brady, coming off of 2 subpar games. I think he bounces back in a big way here versus the Raiders. The Raiders can put points on the board. They're going to keep the pressure on Tom Brady. So I like Tom Brady here versus the Las Vegas Raiders. So there's quite a few sleeper picks at the quarterback position, because a lot of the ownership is going to guys like Kyler Murray, Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, Aaron Rodgers. Those guys are sucking up all the ownership, so you're left with a handful of quarterbacks that are in this 1 to 3% ownership range that I think are great sleeper picks here this week. So you got Drew Brees. He's only going to be about 3% owned, although he's got a tough matchup versus the Carolina Panthers, and he's down Michael Thomas, so I think I'm going to pass on Drew Brees. But then you got Gardner Minshew, who's only going to be about 1% owned, and he's got a fantastic matchup here versus the Los Angeles Chargers, who give up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. And Gardner Minshew has averaged 21.6 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 3.5 rush attempts per game. He's projected at 19.2 fantasy points here tonight, and he's only $5,900 DraftKings salary and $1,300 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 49 points scored in this game, and they have the Jacksonville Jaguars trailing by 7.5. So great matchup here, and it's a passing game script. So I like Gardner Minshew here versus the LA Chargers. And the other quarterback that I think is a nice sleeper pick here in Week 7 is Teddy Bridgewater from the Carolina Panthers playing the New Orleans Saints, who have the 6th worst defense overall, and they give up the 4th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Teddy Bridgewater has averaged 18.5 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 3.8 rush attempts per game, and he's only going to be about 3% owned, projected at 18.4 fantasy points here in Week 7. He's 5,800 DraftKings salary and 1,000 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 50 points scored in this game, with the Carolina Panthers trailing by 6.5. So fantastic matchup here. Pretty high scoring game, although nowadays in the NFL, I feel like 50 points or under is like a low scoring game, but in traditional standards, it's a high scoring game and a passing game script. So I like Teddy Bridgewater here versus the New Orleans Saints. And one last quick mention, I'm not going to go heavy on this guy. I may make one lineup with him in it, but just don't forget about Kyle Allen from the Washington Redskins playing the Dallas Cowboys, who have the 2nd worst defense overall, and they give up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Now, Kyle Allen has only averaged 13.8 fantasy points per game on the season, but he scored 18 fantasy points last week. He's only going to be about 1% owned here, and he's only 5,200 DraftKings salary and 1,500 more on FanDuel. So if you end up making a lineup where you just need a little bit extra salary to fit all the guys in that you want, you could give Kyle Allen a shot at quarterback. He's playing the Dallas Cowboys, who have been awful this year. Their secondary has been terrible, giving up a ton of points every single game they play. So Kyle Allen is a high risk, high reward play here versus the Dallas Cowboys. Okay, let's take a look at the running back position. My sleeper pick at the running back position is Devin Singletary from the Buffalo Bills playing the New York Jets, who have a middle of the pack defense overall, but they give up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Devin Singletary has averaged 10.8 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 11.8 rush attempts per game and 4 pass targets per game. Now, he hasn't done well at all the last 2 games, only scoring 6 and 4 fantasy points, but he put up 19 fantasy points the game before that, and he's only going to be about 1% owned here, projected at 13.3 fantasy points here in Week 7, and he's 5,800 DraftKings salary and 400 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 46 points scored in this game, and they have the Buffalo Bills favored by 10. So I like this game script for Devin Singletary. The Buffalo Bills are going to get up on the Jets, and Devin Singletary can get a lot of work in this one. He's low salary, low ownership. It's a good matchup. They're a favorite in this game. So I like Devin Singletary here versus the New York Jets.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all the tools for NFL, MLB is still going, NBA is right around the corner. This is a great time to get in and try everything for 1 month. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game, so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Another running back sleeper pick for you is Melvin Gordon from the Denver Broncos playing the Kansas City Chiefs, who have a good defense overall. They've been middle of the pack defending opposing running backs. Melvin Gordon has averaged 17.4 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 16.3 rush attempts per game and 3.8 pass targets per game. So he missed last week, so he should be fresh and good to go. They're not going to discipline him. He's going to play this game. He's going to be the starter. He's only going to be about 1% owned. For a guy averaging 17.4 fantasy points per game on the season, I think that ownership is just way too low. He's projected at 13.1 fantasy points here in week 7, and he's 5,500 DraftKings salary and 1,200 more on FanDuel. So Vegas thinks this is going to be a low-scoring game here. Only 44 points scored in this game, with the Denver Broncos trailing by 7. So there is some risk here to this play. If the Denver Broncos fall behind, maybe Melvin Gordon gets a game scripted out of this one as they try to pass the ball to play catch up. But they can get him involved in the passing game, and he's their best offensive player by far. So I'm going to have some shares of Melvin Gordon here versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Now this isn't a sleeper pick here. He's going to be about 26% owned, and that's because Aaron Jones is likely to miss this game. So that means Jamal Williams is going to be the lead running back for the Green Bay Packers, playing the Houston Texans, who have the 4th worst defense overall, and they give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing running backs. So I loved Aaron Jones, but it looks like he's going to miss this game. That puts Jamal Williams in a great spot here. He's only 4,000 DraftKings salary and 1,000 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 56.5 points scored in this game, with the Packers favored by 3. So fantastic matchup, super high scoring game. They're the favorites in this game. They could get a lead, and Jamal Williams could get a ton of work here. So I like Jamal Williams here versus the Houston Texans. Okay, let's take a look at the wide receiver position. One of my sleeper picks here at the wide receiver position is CD Lamb from the Dallas Cowboys, playing the Washington football team, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. And although they're pretty good versus opposing wide receivers, CD Lamb has averaged 17.5 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 8.5 pass targets per game. Now, even with Andy Dalton as the starting quarterback, CD Lamb still got 10 pass targets last game. He only scored 13 fantasy points, but he still got those 10 pass targets, and he's only going to be about 1% owned, projected at 13.4 fantasy points here in week 7. He's 6,500 DraftKings salary and 300 less on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 45 points scored in this game, with the Dallas Cowboys trailing by 1. So I think that ownership is just a little bit too low, considering that he's averaging 17.5 fantasy points per game, and he got 10, 11, and 7 pass targets the last 3 games. So I like CD Lamb here versus the Washington football team. Okay, another one of my sleeper picks at the wide receiver position is Juju Smith-Schuster from the Pittsburgh Steelers, playing the Tennessee Titans, who have the 7th worst defense overall, and they give up the 5th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Juju Smith-Schuster has averaged 12.5 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5.6 pass targets per game. He's only going to be about 2% owned, projected at 11.1 fantasy points here in week 7, and he's 5,500 DraftKings salary and 1,000 more on FanDuel. So he's got a fantastic matchup here. Now, the Pittsburgh Steelers do get Deontay Johnson back, but I think that's going to take a little bit of pressure off of Juju Smith-Schuster. I've been waiting for him to have a breakout week here. I'm not going to go super heavy on Juju Smith-Schuster, but at his low salary and low ownership with a great matchup in a game that should turn into a passing game script, I like Juju Smith-Schuster here versus the Tennessee Titans. Another wide receiver sleeper pick is AJ Green from the Cincinnati Bengals, playing the Cleveland Browns, who have the 10th worst defense overall, and they give up the 4th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. AJ Green, he's only averaged 7.3 fantasy points per game on the season, but he's got an average of 7.5 pass targets per game. He got 11 pass targets last game, scored 18 fantasy points, and he's only going to be about 3% owned here, projected at 10.5 fantasy points here in week 7. And he's only 4,300 DraftKings salary and 1,300 more on FanDuel. So I love that DraftKings price. Fantastic matchup here. Vegas thinks there's going to be 51.5 points scored in this game, with the Cincinnati Bengals trailing by 3. Should be a passing game script. The Cleveland Browns have been awful versus opposing wide receivers. So I like AJ Green here versus the Cleveland Browns. Okay, let's take a look at the tight end position. Okay, moving on to the tight end position. With Austin Hooper out for this one, my sleeper pick at the tight end position is David Njoku from the Cleveland Browns playing the Cincinnati Bengals, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. David Njoku, he's only averaged 5.8 fantasy points per game on the season, getting 2.3 pass targets per game, but he's been playing behind Austin Hooper, so his volume should go up this game. He's going to have a great opportunity to shine here, and he's only going to be about 3% owned, projected at 7.5 fantasy points here in week 7, and he's only 3,000 DraftKings salary and 1,500 more on FanDuel. So I love that DraftKings price. Vegas thinks there's going to be 51.5 points scored in this game, with the Cleveland Browns favored by 3. So I like David Njoku here versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Another sleeper pick here at the tight end position is Hayden Hurst from the Atlanta Falcons playing the Detroit Lions, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. And although they've been pretty good versus opposing tight ends, Hayden Hurst has averaged 10 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5.3 pass targets per game. He scored 16 fantasy points last week off of 4 pass targets, and he's only going to be about 2% owned, projected at 8.9 fantasy points here in week 7. He's 4,400 DraftKings salary and 1,200 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 55 points scored in this game, with the Atlanta Falcons favored by 1.5. So the matchup's not great here, but you got a high-scoring game, a close, competitive game that I think is going to turn into a shootout. So I like Hayden Hurst here versus the Detroit Lions. And another sleeper pick at the tight end position, I like Logan Thomas from the Washington football team playing the Dallas Cowboys, who have the 2nd worst defense overall, and they give up the 9th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Logan Thomas has averaged 7.3 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 6 pass targets per game. He's only going to be about 3% owned, projected at 8.1 fantasy points here in week 7, and he's 3,500 DraftKings salary and 1,500 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 45 points scored in this game. The Washington football team favored by 1, so a pretty close game here. Fantastic matchup. Attack that Dallas Cowboys secondary. So I like Logan Thomas here versus the Dallas Cowboys.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video, or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NFL slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.